Hello, Mr.net is here, and today I show you my first Unity video. I try to explain how we can change dynamically on a 3D object like this plane with a button click the textures in the background. So if you want to learn this, watch this video. So the first thing what I need is a game object, a 3D plane. Yes, that's my plane. I change a little bit the view. Perfect. Then I take the camera and align it with my view so my game scene looks like this. As a next, I insert a button to my plane. Perfect. So I see I have a button and I have here my plane. As a next, I need a script. This script calls behavior. So I have here my script. I open it with Visual Studio. Go to these two methods. I didn't need it for this tutorial. As a next, I need some assets. So I download some assets. From the asset store, I take this asset. That's a free asset. Just a little bit. Yes, I import it into my project. I import all. And in my asset folder I have my materials or my textures. And in the asset folder I also need a new folder called Resources. This name is important. I explain it a little bit later in the video. And I take these three textures and add it to my resource folder. I create here a subfolder called textures and add my textures into this subfolder. Well, so now I implement a method called public void button click. This method has to be called every time when I push the button on my plane. And to look if it run, I print out a simple log message called button clicked. Yes. So now I have here a field on click. And I have to import here a game object. And I import my plane. And we see that I does not see my script here. This is because the button has the script. So I insert my script into the plane, and now I can choose here the behavior, and that's my script. And this script has a button click method. The script hasn't a button click method because I didn't save this script up. Sorry. Behavior. Yes, now I have my method button clicked. So I go to the console, I start my game, and yes, if I click the if I click the button, I get a log message, button clicked. Now I can implement the rest of my script. First I need a method called awake. This method is called only once when the game object is loaded. This method is called, and in this method I load every texture in my resource folder. For that I can use the object resources and the method LoadAll. So I load all objects from type texture, and as a parameter I give here the subname of my folder. This is the folder name texture. This name is this folder here, and I save my textures in a property with the object type texture. That's an array called textures, and I say this resources was what are loaded are these textures. So now I can implement in my button click method, for example, a switch statement. Every time if I click the button, I change the texture. So the first what I need is to ask what is the current texture. And for that I use the game object get component method, and I need the renderer, and this renderer has the property material and the main texture. That's the current texture from my game object. Current texture dot name, and based on the name from the texture I choose another texture. Case 1, case 2, case 3. So if the current texture is the texture 1, I say game object get component renderer material main texture, and set from this array texture the texture 0 or the texture 1. And this method has to be implemented in every switch case. Up. Here I take the texture number 2 and here the texture number 0. Okay, so saving. Now I start the game and nothing happens because I get a null reference exception. Okay, firstly I try to find out what's wrong. Maybe these textures are empty. So I write here a log message to find out that this method is called loading textures. And I also want to know how many textures, how many textures I have loaded to get the length of my texture array. So I start the game, go to the console, yes, loading textures, and textures are 0, so that means that my textures here are 0. This object is empty. This is because I have to change this name of my textures. That's the texture 1. Rename texture 2. Texture 2, and this is the texture 3. I changed this name because I use this name here. So I start the game, and we see also 0 textures are loaded. So what's wrong here? Yes, this folder is called textures. So I try it a second time. Yes, we see we have loaded 3 textures. Now I click the button, the method button clicked is called, and I get a null reference exception. This is because this plane hasn't a texture. So when I load here a texture, I get an exception back. So I ask if... Oh, I didn't get here an exception back, I get here a null object back. And the exception is here thrown. And I set here the texture number 0 if no texture is loaded. And if the first texture is loaded, I take this code snippet. So now I start the game. Yes, and we see my planes are changing the color, but we see I use only 2 textures. So if the texture name is 1, take the second object, name 2, take the dirt object. Yes, that's maybe because the object 1 is the second texture here, so I change only between these textures. So I take here 0 and here the number 2. Now I start the game. Yes, now I'm using all 3 textures. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please give me a recommendation, and maybe you can subscribe so I have my first subscriber, and hopefully I see you in the next video. Bye.